Fred Rogers found the unfinished cardigan 3 days after his mother's funeral. It was in her knitting basket, right where she'd left it. The needles were still in the yarn, still suspended mid-stitch, as if she'd just set it down for a moment, as if she was planning to come back and finish it, but she never would. Fred picked up the half-finished sweater and held it in his hands. The yarn was soft, blue, his favorite color. His mother had known that. She'd been making this for him. A cardigan, just like all the others she'd knitted for him over the years. The cardigans that had become his trademark. The cardigans that millions of children knew him by. But this one was different. This one was incomplete. She'd gotten about halfway through. One sleeve was finished. The other was just beginning. The body of the sweater was mostly done, but the collar wasn't attached. The buttons weren't sewn on. It was beautiful. And it was broken. Just like Fred thought, he sat on the floor of his mother's sewing room, the room that still smelled like her perfume, still had her reading glasses on the side table, still felt impossibly alive despite her being gone, and he cried, not just because his mother had died, but because she'd been trying to give him one more gift, one more sweater, one more tangible piece of her love, and she'd run out of time. Fred Rogers looked at the unfinished cardigan in his hands, and he made a decision that would consume him for the next 18 months. He was going to finish it. Not hire someone to finish it, not find a professional knitter to complete what his mother had started. He was going to learn how to knit at 68 years old, and he was going to finish his mother's last gift himself, because some things can't be left incomplete, even when they're impossible. Nancy Rogers died on February 14th, 2003, Valentine's Day. Fred had been with her when she passed, holding her hand in the hospital room, watching the woman who had given him life slowly let go of her own. She was 92 years old. She'd lived a long, full, beautiful life. She'd raised Fred and his sister. She'd been married to his father for 60 years. She'd knitted hundreds of sweaters for her children, her grandchildren, her friends, strangers who needed warmth. Nancy Rogers had spent her life making things, creating things, giving tangible expressions of love to everyone around her, and even in her final months, while her body was failing and her energy was fading, she'd been knitting one more sweater for Fred. It's almost done, she'd told him 2 weeks before she died. Her hands were shaking as she worked the needles. The arthritis made it difficult, but she kept going. "Mom, you don't have to finish it," Fred had said gently. "You should rest." "I want to finish it," Nancy insisted. "You need a new cardigan. The ones you wear on the show are getting worn out." "I have plenty of cardigans, Mom. You've made me so many." Nancy looked at her son with those sharp, loving eyes. "One more won't hurt." But she never finished it. On February 12th, she had a stroke. By February 14th, she was gone. And the sweater remained incomplete. 3 days after the funeral, Fred went to his mother's house to begin the painful process of sorting through her belongings. His sister Elaine was there too. Together, they moved through rooms filled with memories. Their mother's dresses, her jewelry, her books, her photographs. Each item was a small heartbreak. Fred found the knitting basket in the sewing room. He'd been avoiding that room. It felt too much like her, too alive, too present. But eventually, he had to go in. That's when he found the sweater. Elaine came in and saw Fred sitting on the floor, holding the half-finished cardigan, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, Fred," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "She was making that for you." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment. "What should we do with it?" Elaine asked. Fred looked at the sweater, at the careful stitches his mother had made, at the love woven into every row, at the incompleteness that felt like a wound. "I'm going to finish it," he said. Elaine looked at him, confused. What? I'm going to finish it. I'm going to learn how to knit, and I'm going to complete what Mom started. Asterisk, Fred. You don't know how to knit. Then I'll learn. It's not easy. Knitting takes years to learn properly, and Mom's stitches are so precise. It would be almost impossible to match them. I know. Elaine put her hand on her brother's shoulder. Fred, maybe we should just keep it as it is, as a memory. Or we could find someone to finish it. Someone who knows what they're doing. Fred shook his head. No, Mom was making this for me. If anyone's going to finish it, it should be me. But why? Why does it matter? Fred looked at his sister. Because she ran out of time. And I haven't. Because this was her last gift to me, and I can't leave it unfinished. Because... His voice broke. Because I need to do this. Elaine understood. She hugged her brother, and she didn't argue anymore. Fred Rogers took the unfinished cardigan home. He set it on his desk in his study, and he looked at it every day for a week, trying to figure out where to begin. Joanne, his wife, was worried. Fred, sweetheart, are you sure about this? Learning to knit at your age. It's going to be very difficult. I know. And your mother's stitches, they're so precise. So even, you'd have to become an expert just to match them. I know. It might take years. Then it takes years. Joanne looked at her husband. She'd been married to him for over 40 years. She knew that when Fred set his mind to something, there was no stopping him. Okay, she said. Then I'll help you learn. Fred Rogers' first attempt at knitting was a disaster. Joanne tried to teach him the basics. How to hold the needles. How to cast on. How to do a simple knit stitch. Fred's hands, which had spent decades playing piano with grace and precision, fumbled with the needles like a child trying to use chopsticks for the first time. The yarn tangled. The stitches were uneven. The tension was all wrong. After an hour, Fred had managed to knit about 2 inches. And it looked terrible. This is harder than I thought, he admitted. It takes time, Joanne said gently. No one learns to knit in a day. How long did it take you? Months. And I'm still not as good as your mother was. Fred looked at the pathetic strip of lumpy knitting he produced. Then he looked at his mother's sweater. Her stitches were perfect, even, professional. The gap between what he could do and what he needed to do felt impossible. But Fred didn't quit. He practiced every day, for hours, while watching television, while listening to music. Before bed, his fingers hurt. His hands cramped. The needles felt foreign and awkward, but he kept going. 3 months later, Fred Rogers had learned the basics. He could knit. Not well, but he could do it. His stitches were still uneven. The tension was still inconsistent. But he was learning. Now came the harder part, trying to match his mother's work. Fred laid out the unfinished sweater on his desk. He studied every stitch, every row, every detail. His mother's knitting was flawless. The stitches were so consistent, they looked like they'd been made by a machine. The pattern was complex, a subtle cablement, design that required concentration and skill. Fred tried to replicate. Just 1 row. It took him 3 hours. And when he was done, he compared it to his mother's work. His stitches were looser, less precise. You could see the difference. Immediately, Fred pulled out the entire row and started over and over and over. 6 months after his mother's death, Fred was still working on the sweater. He'd made almost no progress. He'd knitted and re-knitted the same few inches dozens of times, trying to match his mother's stitches, trying to make it look like her work. But it never did. No matter how many times he tried. His knitting looked amateurish next to hers. His friends started to worry. One day, his colleague from the show, a man named David Newell, who played Mr. McFeely, came to visit. He found Fred in his study, hunched over the sweater, pulling out stitches for what must have been the 100th time. "Fred, what are you doing?" David asked gently. "I'm finishing my mother's sweater." "I can see that, but—" "Fred, you've been working on this for months, and you're not making progress. You keep pulling out what you've done, because it's not right. It doesn't match her work." David sat down. "Fred, maybe it's not supposed to match." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your mother's gone. You can't bring her back by making your stitches look like hers. And you can't make this sweater perfect. Maybe that's not the point." Fred looked up, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Then what is the point?" "I don't know, but I don't think it's perfection." Fred turned back to the sweater. I need to finish this. I need to complete what she started. But why does it have to be perfect?" Fred didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't know. 9 months after his mother's death, Fred had what Joanne later called his breakthrough. He was working on the sweater late one night, frustrated, exhausted, ready to give up. He'd been trying to knit a particularly complicated section, the part where the sleeve attaches to the body of the sweater. It required careful counting, precise tension, and perfect execution. Fred had been working on it for 3 weeks, and it still wasn't right. That night, he pulled out his stitches for what felt like the 1,000th time, and he just stopped. He sat there holding the needles, staring at the sweater, and he started to cry. Not quiet tears, deep, wrenching sobs. The kind of grief that had been building for months. The kind that comes from losing your mother and realizing that nothing you do will ever bring her back. Joanne heard him from the other room and came in. She sat beside him and held him while he cried. "I can't do this," Fred said through his tears. "I can't make it look like her work. I've been trying for months, and I can't do it. I'm not good enough." Joanne held him tighter. "Fred, you don't have to be. But if I finish it and it looks wrong, if anyone can tell that I finished it instead of her, then I've ruined her last gift to me. Or," Joanne said gently, "you've completed it. With love, with effort, with your own hands." Fred pulled back and looked at his wife. She continued, "Your mother didn't want to give you a perfect sweater, Fred. She wanted to give you her love. And whether she finished it or you finish it, the love is the same. But it won't be perfect. No, it won't. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the imperfection is part of what makes it beautiful." Fred looked at the sweater, at his mother's perfect stitches, at his own clumsy, uneven attempts next to them. 2 different kinds of work. 2 different levels of skill done, but the same intention. The same love. "What if," Joanne said softly, "what if the fact that it's unfinished, that it's a collaboration between you and your mother, what if that's what makes it special?" Fred was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the needles, and he started knitting again. But this time, he didn't try to match his mother's stitches perfectly. He just knitted, in his own way, with his own hands, with his own level of skill. Imperfect, but honest. 80 months after his mother died, Fred Rogers finished the sweater. It was complete. 1 full cardigan, every stitch in place, sleeves attached, collar sewn on, buttons added. But anyone who looked at it closely could see the truth. The first half the work his mother had done was flawless, professional, beautiful. The second half the work Fred had done was different. The stitches were less even. The tension wasn't quite right. You could see where one person's work ended and another's began. It was imperfect, and it was beautiful. Fred held up the completed sweater and looked at it. For the first time in 18 months, he smiled. "It's done," he said to Joanne. She looked at the sweater at the visible line where Nancy's work ended and Fred's began, and she started crying. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's not perfect," Fred said. "You can see exactly where I took over. My stitches aren't as good as hers." "I know. That's what makes it perfect." Fred looked at his wife, confused. Joanne explained. "This sweater is the story of your relationship with your mother. She started it. She poured her love into every stitch. And then her time ran out. But you didn't let her gift stay incomplete. You learned something new, something hard, just to finish what she started. Your stitches aren't as good as hers, but they're yours. And together, her work and your work make something whole." Fred looked at the sweater again, at the beautiful imperfection of it, at the collaboration between mother and son, separated by death but united by love. "Should I wear it?" he asked. Joanne shook her head. "I don't think so. I think it's too precious for that." Fred agreed. He had the sweater professionally framed, stretched out so you could see all of it. Both halves. His mother's perfect stitches and his own imperfect ones. The line between them visible but not jarring. Beautiful because it was incomplete, and complete at the same time. He hung it on the wall in his study, where he could see it every day. Fred Rogers never told anyone the story of the sweater. Not publicly. Not in interviews. Not on his show. It stayed in his study. A private memorial to his mother. A reminder of love and loss and learning and perseverance. Only his family knew. Only the people closest to him understood what that framed sweater meant. But those who saw it understood immediately. One day, a few years later, Fred's grandson was visiting. He was about 10 years old. He saw the framed sweater on the wall and asked, "Grandpa, why is that sweater on your wall? It looks weird, like two different people made it." Fred smiled. "That's exactly right. Two different people did make it." "Who?" "My mother started it, and I finished it." The boy looked at the sweater more carefully. "The stitches aren't as good as hers." "No, they're not." "So why did you finish it? Why didn't you just let someone better do it?" Fred knelt down beside his grandson. "Because it was her last gift to me. I couldn't leave it unfinished. Even if my work wasn't as good as hers, it was still mine. And sometimes the effort matters more than the perfection." The boy looked at the sweater for a long time. "Is it okay that it's not perfect?" "It's more than okay," Fred said. "The imperfection is what makes it beautiful. Because it's real. It's honest. It's the story of two people, a mother and her son, working together across time and death to create something whole." "I think it's beautiful," the boy said. "So do I," Fred whispered. On February 27th, 2003, just 13 days after his mother died, Fred Rogers was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He didn't tell many people. He kept it quiet. He continued working on the sweater in private, even as his own health declined. By the time he finished the sweater 18 months later, Fred was very sick. The cancer was advanced. He didn't have much time left, but he'd finished what his mother started. In December 2002, Fred Rogers filmed his last episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The show was ending. After 33 years, it was time to say goodbye. And in February 2003, his mother died. And 13 days later, Fred learned he was dying too. Some people might see that as tragic. Mother and son, both dying within months of each other. But Fred Rogers didn't see it that way. He'd been given 18 months. 18 months to finish his mother's gift. 18 months to learn something new. 18 months to create something beautiful with her, even after she was gone. On December 25th, 2003, Christmas Day, Fred Rogers died. He was 74 years old. In his will, he left specific instructions about the sweater, the unfinished but finished cardigan, the collaboration between mother and son. He wanted it buried with him, not worn, not given away, not kept as a museum piece. buried with him. So that his mother's last gift completed by his own hands would go with him wherever he was going next. When Fred's family prepared his body for burial, they draped a blue cardigan over his chest. You could see it clearly if you looked. The line where Nancy's perfect stitches ended and Fred's imperfect stitches began. A mother's love and a son's devotion. Stitched together. Incomplete. And complete. Imperfect and beautiful. Broken. And whole. The story of Fred Rogers and his mother's last sweater was never told publicly during his lifetime. It was private. Sacred. Too personal to share. But after Fred died, Joanne Rogers shared the story with a few close friends. And eventually, it spread, not as a sad story, but as a beautiful one. A story about what love looks like when it refuses to leave things incomplete. A story about learning new things, even when they're hard, even when you're old, even when you'll never be as good as the person who came before you. A story about honoring someone by finishing what they started. A story about imperfection being more beautiful than perfection, because imperfection is honest. Years later, someone asked Joanne Rogers, "Why do you think Fred insisted on finishing that sweater himself? Why did it matter so much to him?" Joanne thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "Because Fred understood something that most people don't. He understood that love isn't about perfection. It's about effort. It's about showing up. It's about doing something hard, even when you're not good at it, because it matters." His mother spent her whole life making things for people, giving tangible expressions of love. And even at the end of her life, even when she was weak and tired, she was still trying to give. But she ran out of time. And Fred couldn't bear to leave her final gift incomplete. He couldn't let her last act of love just stop, unfinished, half-done. So he learned to knit. At 68 years old, even though he'd never done it before, even though he was terrible at it, even though his stitches would never be as good as hers, he learned. He practiced. He persevered. For 18 months, and he finished what she started, not perfectly, but completely. And I think that's what Fred would want us to understand. That love doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. That sometimes the most meaningful things are the ones that show the struggle, the effort, the imperfection. That sweater, with its clear line between Nancy's work and Fred's work, told the truth. It said, a mother loved her son, and her son loved her back. And even death couldn't stop them from creating something together. The frame sweater hung in Fred Rogers' study for less than a year before he died. But in that year, everyone who saw it understood immediately what it represented. Not just a sweater, but a relationship, a lifetime, a love that continued even after death. One visitor, seeing the sweater for the first time, asked Fred, "Is that the sweater your mother was making for you when she died?" "Yes," Fred said. "And you finished it?" "Yes, but your stitches are different from hers. Anyone can tell." Fred smiled. "I know. That's the point. I don't understand. The sweater isn't trying to hide that two people made it. It's celebrating it. My mother started something beautiful, and I continued it. My work isn't as good as hers, but it's mine. And together, we made something complete." The visitor looked at the sweater, at the visible imperfection, the honest collaboration, and started crying. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," they whispered. "So is love," Fred said, "when it's real." Fred Rogers was buried on December 29th, 2003. His family, his friends, his colleagues, they all came to say goodbye to a man who had changed millions of lives. In the casket, Fred was wearing a dark suit, professional, dignified, but draped across his chest, visible to anyone who came close enough to see, was a blue cardigan, imperfect stitches. uneven tension, clearly handmade by someone learning, but complete, whole, finished, a mother's final gift, completed by her son's hands, a collaboration that death couldn't stop, a love that continued beyond the grave. Some of the mourners who knew the story of the sweater saw it and couldn't hold back their tears because they understood what it meant. Fred Rogers had spent 18 months learning to knit, learning to finish what his mother started, learning to create something imperfect but beautiful. And now, in death, he was wearing the result, not a perfect sweater, but a perfect symbol of love, of effort, of refusing to leave things incomplete. Of a son honoring his mother, the only way he knew how. By finishing her last gift with his own hands, in his own way, imperfect, but honest. Incomplete, but whole. Broken, but beautiful.